All of you have heard about the mark of the beast. It's one of the most feared prophecies in the entire Bible. And there's some things happening concerning preparing for the mark of the beast in the United States of America here right now, and also around the world. Now, we know what the mark of the beast is all about. The Bible tells us there will come a time when every person on earth will be required to have a mark or a number, without which they will not be permitted to buy or sell. Now, the kicker is you'll be required to pledge allegiance to the one world governmental system and the ruler of that one world governmental system, the Antichrist. Let me take you to the passage in the scripture first so that you'll see this is straight from the Bible. It's Revelation chapter number 13, verse number 15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. When we say the beast, we're talking about the one world governmental system, the one world government. He had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. We're talking about religious persecution here. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, or 666. Everyone has heard about 666. Well, we've asked a very special guest to be with us today, Mr. Mark Lerner. He's one of the foremost experts on the global ID in the world today. And so, Mark, it's very nice to have you on End of the Age program.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to this discussion.
Well, it's so important for us to talk about it because it's happening right now, and most people are pretty unaware of what's going on. You're not, because you live with it every single day. You've testified before different governmental committees, and you've had a lot of input in industry even about the goal to number everybody.
Now, as to why now and not 20 years ago or 200 years ago, because now the political will and the technology exist. You have to have both components. 20 years ago, the technology really did not exist.
Let's stop right there, Mark. So what you're saying is we've got a 2,000-year-old prophecy, but until the invention of the computer and the birth of the internet, it wasn't even possible.
The technology of biometric, and we're going to get into this, I can see already as we continue this discussion, but bio itself simply means body. Metric, measurement. So we're going to be talking about body measurement. We're going to get into discussion about number of man. But the important thing to know is biometrics have existed from the beginning of man. There's been a biometric. Adam had fingerprints. Okay, we didn't understand the science of biometrics, the measurements of man, or the number of man, really until this century, this last century. So, although biometrics existed, these unique identification characteristics, these measurements, we didn't talk about biometrics until this last century. And from that point forward, we now understand how biometrics can be used. There are two types of control, and one is direct control. If you don't have the documents I say, you can't do something. For instance, if you don't have the proper identification card, you can't get a job, you can't open up a bank account, etc. That's direct control. Indirect control is far more insidious. What indirect control does is it controls your actions through coercion, through basically saying to you, if you do this, we're going to know about it. So what does it do? It intimidates you. For instance, if you wanted to attend a rally supporting a certain candidate or opposing an issue, something the government was going to do, and you knew at that rally you were going to be identified, you might think, wait a minute, I don't want to be identified, so I'm not going to that rally. That's indirect control. All people are being enrolled into a system. It's a global system of identification and financial control. This enrollment process is well underway to the point that India has awarded the same company that produces driver's licenses in the United States a contract to provide 1.2 billion people with a biometric identification card.
So India's got it.
India's got it.
China's got it.
China's working on it.
They've already said they're
That's right.
They're moving that direction.
Mexico got it. The United States has it.
Most of Europe.
All Europe.
Yeah.
All Europe. So I am going to make the point as we get further into this discussion that we know from agreements between the company that produces these documents, biometric identification cards, and the World Bank, that all people are going to be in this system. This is what is going to differentiate what people believe about the Real ID Act and what they're going to know. Right here, on page 68 of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the standard for your digital facial image on your driver's license, I don't care what state you live in, is the adopted standard of the ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, an agency of the United Nations. So when we talk about national ID, true, but let's go further, expand our thinking. We're being enrolled into a global system of identification. In the final rules of the Real ID Act, the organization that is named the hub and the backbone for implementing the Real ID Act, it's called AMVA. AMVA means American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. Well, most people think that's okay.
It says American.
American.
Yeah.
Well, AMVA isn't American. There are 18 benchmarks to Real ID. There's a disconnect between what the state legislatures have said and what the bureaucrats with the Department of Motor Vehicles are doing. Even though the state legislators and even the citizens have said no part of Real ID, the state bureaucrats working in the Department of Motor Vehicles are continuing to meet benchmarks of the Real ID Act. There are 18. First one being the digital facial image. So what Congress will do is inevitably repeal the Real ID Act, bring the wolf back dressed in sheep's clothing under a different name, and continue meeting the benchmarks of Real ID. There's a gentleman, Julian Ashburn, with the International Biometrics Agency. He is on record. The exact quote is, "We need a global agency with global powers." So right away, forget about your sovereignty. He is talking about a global agency, global powers, International Biometrics Agency. Robert Mockney of the Department of Homeland Security made the quote, "Information sharing is appropriate around the world, and DHS plans to create a global security envelope of internationally shared biometric data that would permanently link individuals with biometric ID, personal information held by governments and corporations." More to the point, L1 Identity Solutions. This is the company in the United States that provides nearly every driver's license. They're involved in the production of all U.S. passports, passport cards, etc. This company is in the process of being sold. Our personal information now is going to be potentially accessible to a foreign mega conglomerate called Safran, a French company that is 30% owned by the French government. Now, L1 last year reached an agreement with the World Bank that they would provide biometric identification documents to developed and underdeveloped countries literally all countries, developed and underdeveloped, would have biometric identification cards that meet these international standards, then this is what Scripture tells us will happen. A system applying to all people, rich and poor, etc. So the question is, how does the church escape being in this system while others, all others, are being enrolled into this? And this is the issue of what one young woman is doing in Texas, or in Oklahoma, excuse me. She's refusing to renew her driver's license.
Okay, so this lady, her name, I think you told me, is K Beach?
K Beach.
Okay, and she came to the point in her own heart that she said, I'm not going to do this. Now, we're not telling all of you out there that if you renew your driver's license, you've just taken the mark of the beast. We're not telling you that, but we are telling you that this system, unchecked, is ultimately going to become the mechanism.
Yes.
For the mark of the beast. I want to make that really clear here, Mark. So she's decided she's getting off of this train now.
Satan is not God. Satan does not have the powers of God. Satan has to figure out where all the people are, who they are, where they're at, all this, before the mark of the beast can be attached to people, on people. Some people would say in people. But if you really want to get your people to pay attention, there's a company, Somark Innovations. They produce RFID tattoos. Now, the information that we think of normally stored in an RFID chip actually goes in the ink of the tattoo. Somark Innovations. Now, this could fulfill, depending on the version of the Bible a person reads, and I'm not here to convince somebody to read one version versus the other. If we're talking about New King James Version, we're talking about on the skin. So the tattoo would do that. If we're talking about in the skin, which would be the King James Version, then we're talking about something along the lines of an RFID chip. Either way, what people have to understand, and should be clear to all Christians, is the mark of the beast, once here, is a system, a device, a mechanism of control that God clearly condemns. Government will come to you, and I know this because of Scripture, and they're going to say the only way to be sure that we know who you are is to move the identification process from the identification document directly onto you, the person. But what we all need to understand ultimately, every one of us, we have a responsibility to preach the gospel. If we don't resist our rights being limited, restricted, our ability to preach the gospel is lessened.
Basically, you're not going to be able to function in this society, and it is tailor-made for the implementation of the mark of the beast prophesied 2,000 years ago.
Hello, I'm K Beach. My attorneys filed a lawsuit in Oklahoma on my behalf on September 21st, 2011. I believe, as Christians, we have a religious right to be exempted from enrollment into a global system of identification and financial control. Winning this court case in Oklahoma is the first step in sending a strong message to Washington that we do not need their permission to buy, sell, travel, or work. You should know that Congress has before it right now legislation that would mandate that all financial institutions require a biometric identification document. The Photo Identification Security Act does not define financial institution, which means it could be your bank, credit union, or anywhere such as a retail store that exchanges money for goods and services. In addition, another bill called the Legal Workforce Act would require all businesses to register with the Department of Homeland Security. This legislation would give DHS the ability to require the biometrics of any citizen who wishes to work. Under the Legal Workforce Act, all current and prospective employees, and this includes the church, would have to be cleared by the Federal Department of Homeland Security. The presumption of innocence is the cornerstone of our justice system. Mandatory collection of our biometric information destroys the presumption of innocence. The Constitutional Alliance is working in Oklahoma and across the country so that all Christians can have an exemption if they choose. But we can't do it without your help. Please support the work that we're doing by contributing whatever you can to the Constitutional Alliance today.